Okay guys, can do a video on the bloody code now. I'm going to try and keep this one under 10 minutes, but it might run a little bit over because this is a really big topic. The bloody code, in short, is a period of extremely harsh punishments and law enforcement by the government against people of England. Roughly speaking, we start the bloody code in 1688. When we start to see a huge increase in the number of crimes that are punished by capital punishment. And roughly speaking, we say it ends around 1830, when the government abolished nearly all capital crimes. They keep the death penalty for murder and for murder of a police officer and really serious crimes like that. Okay, so factors that we're going to be looking at are going to be the government and the role of the government in passing laws, public attitudes, technology, poverty, towns and travel. Okay, so they're all our factors that we're going to be thinking about when we talk about changing continuity and the bloody code. Okay, so like I said, around about 1688 we start to see big changes in crime, and we see around 50 crimes in 1688 carrying capital punishment, the death penalty. This jumps up to about 160 by the mid-1700s, and at its peak in around 1815, shortly before most capital crimes were abolished, there's about 225 crimes that carry capital punishment, the death penalty. Okay, with 225 crimes carrying the death penalty, you can imagine that all the serious things like treason and murder and rape are in there, but so are things like poaching, counterfeiting money and forgery of money, going out at night in a disguise or blacked up, with the connotation being that you are disguised or you're wearing black in order to go out and steal or burgle or horse rustle, and theft of anything over a shilling, which isn't a great amount of money. So what you have with the bloody code is a system of harsh punishments for pretty much every crime going, especially by 1815. So why did the government go so hard on crime in this period? Well, firstly, it's because they feared crime and they feared criminals as a threat to society. The government and the public fear crime, and pamphlets and broadsheets are part of this. Okay, these give horrific details of crime, of terrible criminal acts all around the country. And if you think about this logically, it makes sense. Before pamphlets and newspapers and broadsheets, if you wanted to find out about crime, you had to go and travel to an area and speak to people, or people would come to your area and speak to you. With pamphlets and broadsheet newspapers, what you can actually do is report on crimes all around the country and then circulate those newspapers in towns and cities. So very simply put, this means that people from about the 1680s can read about crimes all over England, and this gives you the perception that crime is on the increase. Ironically, this hasn't changed, and actually certain newspapers today, front page is always something negative or something to do with crime, and it gives people the feeling that, you know, crime is out of control. The second one is that people are on the move. As we looked at with vagabonds, towns are growing in size, you have more people, a growing population, it's harder to police because hue and cry really only works in small communities, and there's better roads and horses are becoming cheaper, so people can move about. So this also gives the impression that crime is on the increase, or that there is some kind of threat to society. Secondly, the government and the rich landowners are only interested in protecting their property. They see the poor as a threat, as a real threat to their wealth, and they want to keep the poor in their place. So they're going to make laws that protect their own property. Hence why pretty much, well, not all of them, but most of your bloody code crimes are to do with protecting property or protecting wealth in some way. And finally, people's views. Not a lot's changed. People believe that if you want to stop crime, you have to punish them really harshly. Okay? And yes, this makes sense for serious crimes, but to people in the 16 and 1700s, it also makes sense to do it for all crimes. Okay? So take, for example, a crime like poaching. Poaching is a crime against property because you are going onto someone else's land and killing their animals which belong to them. Therefore, you should punish them extremely harshly so that they get the message not to do it. In reality, this doesn't really work, which is why we don't have a bloody code now. Okay. Other punishments at the time, because it wasn't all about being executed, pillory, using to shame and humiliate people, usually for very, very small crimes, cheating, swearing, selling rotten food. Fines for swearing, gambling, missing church. Being whipped, which was mainly as a form of humiliation on the market day for similar crimes to what we just looked at. And then something called a house of correction. Now, this isn't a jail. They were traditionally known as bridewells, and they still exist today, except now they're probably converted into banks or bars. But if you were a vagabond or a prostitute or an unmarried mother, you could be sent to the house of correction. Okay, and finally, transportation, which was always used as an alternative to the death penalty. From 1660 to 1680, people were transported to America. Then America had its revolution, and from 1787 to 1868, people were transported to Australia. And then finally, transportation ended in Australia when Australia gained a little bit more independence and they found gold. But I'll do a separate video on transportation. Prisons were used mainly for debtors, prostitutes, and vagabonds, so nothing much has changed there. Okay. And the reason why the Bloody Code ended is mainly because of a mixture of factors, but mostly it's the increase in the use of prisons. And by the 1830s, capital crime and the punishment of capital crimes with the death penalty is becoming less and less popular. Okay, this period overlaps really nicely with an increase in the government's building of new prisons. So, for example, in 1842, between 1842 and 1877, new prisons are built with a new idea behind them, which is the separate and silent system, as a way of reforming. Okay, so in a nutshell, the Bloody Code is a really, really nasty form of punishment for a whole host of crimes. And it's caused mainly by fear of crime, people being on the move, the desire to protect property, and people's views and attitudes of punishing criminals really, really strictly.